All right, today I will be reading chapter 9 of Parrot in the Oven. It is called Dying of Love. To Mom's surprise, Dad actually found a job doing office work for the Awani Building Company. To everyone's surprise, Nardo got a job delivering medicine for Gideon's pharmacy. I helped him with his route on Saturdays when the weather was either snips of cold, snagging fish hooks through your clothes, or just plain icy, with steam flowing from every breath. Nardo would keep the engine running while I bolted for the cash, or medical card, whichever arrangement those old retired geezers had with the pharmacy. Afterward, we'd go into lunch in Chinatown and order hot plates of chow mein noodles and sweet and sour pork. That Saturday, I roused myself from bed, put on my red hunter's jacket, and right away walked out into the thin ghost of fog. I heard the kitchen faucet hissing and saw Mom through the kitchen window, squeezing a mop in the sink. Humming as she shook out dirt from the strands, she was wearing her flower print dress, the one with the flowers faded and rumpled like she crushed it in her hands before putting it on. She always did chores before the sun blinked on the horizon, when she could think clearer without a lot of kids yelling, or Sanchez, our neighbor with the blue virgin tattooed across his back, gunning his car engine. She began slapping the mop wildly on the floor, shuffling around in my dad's old high-top boots, the ones with the buckles torn out of the tongues wagging. Most of the time, she mopped the floor barefoot, since her feet had enough calluses to step on my dad's cigarette butts without making her wince. But that day, it was too cold. I heard more water moaning through the pipes than a drumming in the bathtub. Dad was taking a bath and singing. For as long as I remember, especially when in a good mood, he sang this Mexican ballad that I could never figure out the words to. He'd repeat this one line over and over: Quiero morir de amor, or Quiero vivir con amor. I want to die of love, or I want to live with love. One or the other, I wasn't sure. Both phrases in Spanish sounded so alike. When I neared the pharmacy, the sun was knifing a big blue hand through the ghost of fog. Sweeping them away like cobwebs, the maple trees on the streets were dreary and weeping moisture, their striped bark dusted with a glassy talcum of mist. But that, too, was melting, and when the wind came, little sneezes of drivel sprayed on my face. Nardo, who'd taken off earlier, should have been waiting outside since he didn't want Mr. Giddens to find out I was working with him. I doubted if he'd get fired, though, since Nardo, with my help, was the fastest deliverer that old boss man had. I waited outside, trying to keep my teeth from chattering. Finally, against the nagging in my head, I stepped inside. Mr. Giddens was behind the counter, pouring pills with a plastic shovel into a jar. He had parched hands and a face hacked as if baseball cleats. I acted casual over the get well cards, pretending to read them and then jamming them back into the slots. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Giddens sizing me up. He put down what he was doing and came over. He had a mustache of sweat and tiny diamond necklaces under his eyes. Figuring he'd lose more money from thievery than gas bills, he kept the store steaming hot so that everybody who came in would have to take off their coats and hang them on a tree rack by the door. I didn't take off my coat, and that's why Mr. Giddens noticed me. Steering his finger towards the storage room in the back, he said, "You and Bernard better get your butts cracking. All the other boys are gone." "Yes, sir, Mr. Giddens," I said, hurrying down the aisle. "We'll get going right away. I'll tell my brother to get going." "Don't think I don't know about you two working together," he shouted after me, wiping his face with a handkerchief. "I wasn't born yesterday." Nardo was busy sorting out prescriptions in a cardboard box. Other guys hoarded routes that gave tips or had addresses near their homes so that they could knock off for lunch. Nardo didn't need to, since most of the guys lived across town, and our side of town didn't give any tips. Acting annoyed when I came in, Nardo nodded and kept counting the bags of prescriptions. In the storage room, there was packing crates full of empty soda bottles. I put my finger into the hole of a Dr. Pepper. "You ready?" "Yeah, let's get going." "We still going to Chinatown?" "Yeah, we're still going to Chinatown," he said, still annoyed. "I think we should finish all the deliveries before we eat, though, don't you?" "If you say so." "Yeah, I say so," he said. "Hey, and what's the deal coming in through the store?" He put the box down on a chair and shook his coat before putting it on. "What did the old fart say anyway?" "I think he knows we're working together." "For crying out loud, I knew he'd find out," he said, pushing his fingers through his hair. "Well, if we don't admit it, I think it'll be all right." To keep up the pretending, I went back and through the store with the idea of going around to the alley, where Nardo would pick me up. That's when I saw Dorothy, Mr. Giddens' daughter. Although I didn't know her name or who she was at the time, she was standing over by the get well cards where I'd stood, raising her arms in the air and talking excitedly to Mr. Giddens. She kept turning heatedly away from him as if to puzzle over some hot question. Then she'd whirl around and say stuff like, "You're kidding," or "That's hard to believe." When she saw me, she smiled like she recognized me, then turned back around to Mr. Giddens, who looked at me like suddenly an idea had popped into his head. "Oh, Manuel, could you come over here a minute?" he said, bending his arm around in a little coral. "I want to introduce you to my daughter." He kept circling his hand for me to come over, but I couldn't get my shoes to budge. Something was screwed on wrong. Mr. Giddens inviting me over to introduce me to his daughter wasn't natural. He hardly ever talked to Nardo, and the only time he'd ever talked to me was on that day, and then only to yell at me. "Dorothy, this is one of my delivery boys. Manuel, Hernandez. Or is it Herrera? Hernandez." "Oh yeah," he said, tossing his hand lightly in the air. "I get Bernard confused as well," he smiled and looped his arm around me. Dorothy wore a beige skirt and a thinly woven sweater with cord designs. Her hair was clipped in high bangs on her forehead. Close up, her shoulders and hair smelled like peach orchard with the wind coming through it. And there was a sort of mushy softness to her face, like she carefully massaged oils and special creams onto it. Her nose was small, with the most delicious angles, and she was a moony way of looking at me that got me all buttery inside. "Hi, Dorothy," I said, anxious to meet her, yet stiffening a little against Mr. Giddens' push. "Hi," she said, smiling. She wanted to talk more with her father, but he didn't want to. He clamped both of his hands on my shoulder. "You know, Dorothy," he said, "one day Manuel is going to be my best deliverer. Right now I have him training with his brother Bernard. He's too young to have a license, but as soon as he gets one, he's going to have a job right here." "But Dad, what about the cards?" she said, taking a big step forward. "Oh, the cards. Is that all you want? Well, go ahead, take as many as you like." He waved his hand carelessly along the aisle. "If you want more, there's boxes of them in the back. Here, I'll get Manuel to help you." "I already have ones that I want," Dorothy said, tapping the stack of cards she had in her hand against her other wrist. "Oh, well, I'll tell you what. How many do you have there?" Dorothy tilted her head slightly, and one of her eyes shrunk with suspicion. 15, she said. 15, huh? I'll tell you what. Get one more, making it even 16. I'm sure Manuel here would like to go. "What do you say? Would you like to come to Dorothy's party? Lots of food and punch," he said, this enthusiastically wiping his face with a handkerchief. But while he did, Dorothy was tightening her shoulders and her smile collapsed a little. "Dad," she said, stressing her voice. No. I'm serious about this now. I think Manuel would like to come. Wouldn't you, Manuel?" Sure, you'd like to come." "Dad," Dorothy said again, and this time her smile vanished. She struggled to hold her hands to her sides. I could see the bones on her chest stretching from the muscle, like little wing blades about to take flight. "Do you know what, dear?" Mr. Giddens said, his eyes sparkling. "Now that I think of it, maybe some of the other delivery boys would like to come to your party. Maybe I'll ask them." "They're too old," Dorothy exclaimed. "You're going to spoil it, Dad. You're going to mess it all up like you always do." Her face was glowing with defiance. "Well, maybe you're right, honey," Mr. Giddens said, putting his hand on his waist and eyeing Dorothy as if figuring out a complicated math problem. "Maybe just Manuel then, huh, sweetheart?" An idea snapped inside Dorothy's head. She turned hopefully to me. "Maybe he doesn't want to come, Dad." "Sure he wants to come. Don't you, Manuel?" Mr. Giddens said, egging me on. "Well," I said, "I don't know what to say, really. Didn't know what was going on. Whatever was going on, though, I knew words wouldn't help." "But he won't know anybody," Dorothy pleaded. "That's what you'll be here for, honey," Mr. Giddens said with assurance. "To introduce him around, make him feel welcome. I'm positive he'll have a good time." Okay, I give up," Dorothy said, gritting her teeth and dropping her arms. Exacerbated, she handed me an invitation card. "Here, you're invited," she said half-heartedly. Despite being angry, Dorothy had a smooth, floating look about her as she walked quickly away, like she was being lifted by the applause in a theater full of people. I remembered then a vase I saw at the Kern Museum. It belonged to some rich people who first settled our town, and it was beautiful. Not the vase, actually, but everything inside and around the vase. The tinted petals of the roses and the white flowers, tiny as gnats in the deep glowing nut color of the mahogany table. Everything seemed so perfect, and the vase held it all together. I remember thinking if somebody were to come in that exact moment and lift that vase off the table, the whole room and everything in it would collapse. Before walking out the door, Dorothy turned and smiled. It was a smile that would tumble around inside my brain for days. I wanted to believe that it meant that somehow she changed her mind about me, and that I'd be welcome to her party, but deep down I knew it didn't. In any case, I didn't care. Only later, when I realized that I should have cared, did it really hurt. Just then, I felt someone's eyes on the back of my neck. It was Nardo near the storage door, staring at me. He was smiling too, but a mocking smile, like he sure didn't envy my predicament. We went straight home after work, not stopping in Chinatown. Nardo was anxious to tell everybody in the world about Dorothy. He took off his coat and flung it into the living room. Missing by a breath, the shelf where Mom displayed her miniature animals. He rushed over to Magna, who was eating cornmeal mush at the yellow formica table. And he said, "Hey, do you know what? Manny's got the hots for Mr. Giddens' daughter." "Mr. Giddens has a daughter?" "Yeah, and pretty too. At least I think she's pretty, underneath all that snobby makeup. But you should have seen Manny." He pointed at me. He got all mushy and red all over. Boy, was it sad sight. I thought his jaw was going to drop off. "My jaw wasn't doing nothing," I said suddenly. "Hey, what can I say?" He arched his eyebrows and sprouted 10 innocent fingers. "If Mr. Giddens notices, anybody can." "Nobody notices nothing," I said, sinking into a chair. "Nobody notices nothing," Nardo mimicked. He shook me teasingly on the shoulder. "You should have heard what he said when you went out through the front door." "Aw, you don't want to know about that?" He slapped me on the shoulder. I was dying to know, but I wasn't about to admit it to him. If I even hinted that I was interested, he wouldn't tell me for as long as he could torture me by not telling. I could feel his and Magna's superior eyes on me, grins stretching back to their ears. When I looked up, they shut down their smiles and exchanged nods. "Is there any more cornmeal?" Nardo asked, his voice a deep echo inside the open refrigerator. "No, I just made this for me," Magna said, innocently pinching cornmeal from her lip. "Mom said to wait till she got back. She's going to buy fig Newtons to eat until she fixes dinner." "Fig Newtons, huh?" Nardo said, casual as could be. He acted like nothing was going on. But I could tell he knew he had me hooked. He closed the door and stared at the ceiling, his eyes icing over. "Don't you know what's going on, stupid?" he burst out suddenly. "Mr. Giddens and his wife are going to be out of town. He just wants you to spy on his daughter's party while he's away." Shaking her head, Magna lurched forward. She had food in her mouth and had to swallow before talking. "You mean she didn't invite him?" she asked, choking. "No. Yes, she did." "Boy, are you going to be out of place there," Magna said, shaking her head. "He don't listen. He thinks he's really been invited." "She gave me an invitation," I said hotly. "Yeah, an invitation with nothing written on it. They'll probably make him wash dishes," Magna put in. "No, they'll tell him to feed the dog." Magna pushed her cornmeal away, afraid she'd tip it over while she laughed, but spilled some anyway. "Aw, you guys could kiss lemons for all I care," I said, pushing my chair. "Yeah, I know what you want to kiss," Nardo howled. "Is that true?" Magna asked, glassy-eyed with laughter, but fighting to be serious. "Do you really like that white bitch?" "She's not a bitch," I said, even hotter. "So you do like her," she exclaimed. You leaned back on her chair, beaming, as if remembering something savory. "Boy, I thought you had better sense than to fall for some white girl. You guys ain't funny, you know that? You ain't funny." "Oh, I wasn't trying to be funny." It was Nardo who was trying to be funny. Magna said, jerking her thumb at him, "I was trying to figure out why Chicano guys are always falling for white girls, that's all." That's when, my skin blazing, I stomped out the door, knowing that their teasing wasn't going to let up. I began rushing across the yard when suddenly I stopped, remembering that it was best not to go more than a sprinter's distance from the house. Since then, the Garcia brothers roamed the projects like a pack of ferocious dogs. I lingered over my mom's pruned rose bushes, fingering the ashy thorns on the stems. I pricked my finger and out popped a small globe of blood. It tasted like copper. Inside the kitchen, I could hear them laughing in lightning spurts, gorging on their own stupid wisecracks. Magna kept calming herself, then bursting out again in wild giggles. Finally, she said something about what a poor baby I was, and sobbed Nardo for being so mean. Then Nardo said something nasty that started her laughing all over again. Maybe they were right, though. Maybe this was all a big joke to Mr. Giddens. All I knew was that for days after I couldn't pluck Dorothy's smile out of my mind, I was locked in a long mental torture of remembering her every move. Her defiant eyes when arguing with Mr. Giddens, the fast fall of her blonde hair when she crooked her neck, her bored fingers fluttering along the shelves when she pretended not to be listening. I even found myself thinking for hours over the designs of wind that wove behind her when she walked out of the store. A flash of shame bloomed in my face because when I focused my eyes, there, suddenly in front of me, was Magna. "Boy, you really are hurting," she said, shaking her head. You're going to get in trouble, you know that. If I was you, I wouldn't go to that party," she warned. "Well, you're not me. Besides, look who's talking about white people." Magna just stared at me like she didn't believe what I'd said. She went back inside, listlessly, waving her hand in the air. "Just don't get burned, that's all I gotta say. Don't get burned." Once she had closed the door behind her, Nardo right away began laughing again, but she didn't join in. For days I suffered the joy of terror wanting to go to Dorothy's party and knowing that it would be a big mistake. It was like a loose tooth you kept wiggling with your tongue, slow and deliberate, teasing the pain. The pain, however, wasn't in my mouth, but inside my chest. I fought against it. I'd stare hard into the mirror and order myself over and over to be strong. Be a man. But then a cold fluttering would begin in the pit of my chest, and before I could stop, it'd spurt a misty burning in my throat and eyes. My mind was speeding anxiously, gobbling up whole chunks of anticipation. At first, time seemed slow and heavy, but then faster and lighter. Lighter until the day of the party, when the waiting became like no wait at all. Even so, I began to panic when Nardo pulled our Plymouth up in front of Mr. Giddens' house. It was a cold night, but I was soaked in dread and could barely breathe. I was trying to be casual so that Nardo wouldn't catch on and tease me, but he knew something was up and snatched me by the arm. "Hey, don't stick your foot and shit in there. You know what I mean." "No, it might stink." "Oh." When I opened the car door, the cold gushed in. The car had no heater, so when I spoke, clouds puffed from my mouth. "Hey, Nardo," I said, turning back. "What do you think I should do?" Nardo revved the engine lightly. "It turned off if you didn't gas the pedal." "I don't know," he said, thinking. "Maybe you should try to have fun." He let the engine rumble. "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing." "Well, hey, don't worry. They're just a bunch of stuck-up gavachos." He smiled, pinched his lips shut, and crunched the car into reverse. The car wound backward down the street and veered before going forward. I walked toward the house, my breath fogging the air, my shoes cracking lines of geometry on the frozen lawn. The grasping night air, the far-off streetlights flashing, and the windows of the other houses on the block closing like eyelids too tired to stay awake, left me stiff with dread. Then a chill wind prowled under my jacket wing and climbed to my ribs, making lips blur. I zippered the jacket up and went to the porch steps. A friend of Dorothy's answered the door. He was a husky, autumn-leaf-haired guy with a face spattered with freckles. He stood by the door, I suppose to welcome people as they came. I figured he was Dorothy's boyfriend because he stood beside her, brilliant white kernels of teeth blaring. Dorothy had on pleated gray skirt and white blouse, ironed even under her arms and on the tips of her collar. Her hair, flared back in curls, was clasped by a black barrette with tiny diamonds on it. And she was wearing earrings. She had a drowsiness to her eyes, but when she smiled, her whole face gladdened like she admired a cute baby. "How are you doing, Manuel?" she said, like these were the first words she used all day. "I'm doing real good, thank you," I said, surprised the words even came from my mouth. "Well, come inside. It's cold out here," she said fussily. I put on a big smeary smile and urged my legs forward. My lungs felt big as balloons. There was a song by the Rolling Stones on the record player. I was nervous, but once I put my hand on the back of my neck, trying to look casual, I felt even better. Even in the darkness, I sensed the eyes of Dorothy's friends, wondering who I was. Silent messages passed down the line of girls sitting on the long leather couch. The guys standing by the large frosted windows were staring hard at me. They were about my age or a little older, dressed in iron slacks, wool sweaters, and blazers. One guy left a window and offered a hand a girl sitting on one of the couches. She refused with a bored shrug, signaling the side of her face towards me. The guy nodded and walked into the brightly lit kitchen. Then a girl with her hair fluffed airy and wispy like cotton candy came over. She was tiny waisted, her face spotted with brown freckles. Hi, she said, eyeing me up and down. I'm Gloria. I'm Manuel. I work at Dorothy's father's store. I sort of stumbled with the words. Dorothy's father's store, but she nodded her head like she understood. Oh, I know, said the girl. I know. She told me all about it. Dorothy was not far away. She was talking in whispers to the red-haired guy who was nodding his head up and down. Then she drifted around the room, speaking to people's ears and looking up at me. I snuck glances at her as she moved around the room, knowing that something about me was being exchanged. Yet at the same time, not caring, I remembered her smile at the store, and for some strange reasons, its effects on me was like a powerful light splashing around inside me, chasing away the shadows. The turntable spun a slow song and the lights dimmed. Everybody began to dance, melting into a warm darkness of bodies. I was relieved for a moment because I felt that maybe they'd forgotten about me. I was almost sure of it when Gloria clasped my arm and led me to the middle of the dance floor. She linked her hands in mine, and a guy I didn't know cheerfully saluted us from across the room with a Dixie cup. We breathed on each other, Gloria breathing normal and me almost not at all. Although I could smell the powder of her shoulders and perfume behind her ears. As we danced, I saw Dorothy with the red-haired guy not far from us, her hand pressed against his chest. He had a drink of rum in one hand and the other a cigarette, which he casually puffed on, but removed when he leaned over to whisper into Dorothy's ear. He said something and dropped his eyes down the neck of her blouse. Dorothy looked cool and fresh, as if carved from the night air. The way her shoulders lifted, the way her heels didn't sway when she danced, the way the hem of her skirt fluttered, as if the air itself was swishing out of her way, touched my skin with a strange warmth, like I was deliciously licked all over by tiny tongues of flame. I envied red hair. But this dreamy stumbling over Dorothy caused me to hug Gloria a bit too close and not fit her into the dancing rhythm. My leg accidentally slid between hers. She got angry right away. Hey, what's going on here? What do you think you're doing? I stepped back, startled, the brittle feeling of my dream collapsing. But I didn't say anything. Later, when I thought about it, after I ran it over and over in my mind, I realized that was a mistake. I should have said sorry right away. I should have kept my voice close. By stepping back, everybody's eyes focused on me. When I told Nardo later what happened, he said that it wouldn't have mattered what I did. The lights blinked on, and the guy playing the records abruptly took the needle off the grooves. People groaned. Although he looked like he didn't totally know what was going on, Red Hair grabbed my arm and pulled me away. Not hard or jerking, but firm, as if ushering me out of a place I wasn't supposed to be. I told you what he's up to, I heard Dorothy say with a coffee dryness. Before I could half free my arm to say something, I noticed her from the corner of my eye twirl around and walk swiftly into the kitchen, her skirt flapping. Still a bit puzzled but determined that it was his show now, Red Hair let my arm go. There was a group of about 4 older guys in front of me, blocking my way to the door. They weren't big guys, nor did they look particularly mean, but they were 4 and I didn't know them. For a short dissolving second, I thought of shouldering my way through them and hurrying for the door. But they had these tense, questioning looks, and I was beginning to feel needles on my skin. Instead of bumping into them, I took a step forward, a sliding glass on my door on my right, and slid it open enough to squeeze out. It led to a backyard, which, like the house, was enormous. There were trees and bushes everywhere, and the grass went on for about a half a block and glowed with an icy sheen. I looked up, and the sky had a sort of bright raspiness to it. Like dark water became slack after boiling. The air was chilly, but my chest hurt not from the cold, but from a feeling of everything being empty, as if inside my lungs were only echoes. I began to walk anxiously back and forth along the side of the house, searching for an opening. The yard was surrounded by a high cedar fence, brown and slivering where some of the wood had curled with age. As if I climbed it, I'd get splinters. I passed the glass door, and from the light of the outside lamp, I saw the reflection of a ridiculous boy. A clumsy boy. It was me, looking at myself, except that wasn't me, but someone ghostly and strange. Then a shadow came across my reflection. Thinking for a second that it was Dorothy, my heart gulped. "What are you doing out here, pal?" Red Hair said. His voice was an electrical current traveling underwater. He was standing near me, his head glowing in the bright light that just then darkened with the heads of more guys. I hear crazy things about you, buddy. Crazy things. Red Hair was rolling a piece of gum between his teeth and looking back at his friends as they began to fan out around the side of the house, as though inspecting the grass and flower beds for snails. He leaned up close to me, almost touching my shoulder, then looked off to the far end of the yard. The outside lamp shone hard on half his face, and I could see the muscles of his jaw pulsing. You know, guys like you are weird ducks, he said in a loud but lazy voice. You just hang around quacking and flapping your little paddle feet. Do you know what I mean? I felt like a piece of cold steel was caught in my throat. Noticing that I wasn't saying anything, Red Hair went on, moving his chin in little jerks. Well, let me just say this, pal. I don't care if you are supposed to be a guest. This is not your party, and I don't like you coming around here bothering Dorothy. The last part he said was a hard pop of his gum as he grounded his teeth into it. I wanted to tell him that it was all a mistake, that Mr. Giddens made me come, and that I wasn't dying of love anymore, but I knew my brain was just searching for excuses. Whether Red Hair sensed what I was thinking, or whether he just thought he'd say enough. He smiled and shook his head at his friends. He put his thick palm on my shoulder, and in an almost friendly way conked me a couple of times on the head with a large knuckle of his hand. Then, still chewing his gum hard, he turned towards the sliding glass door. There, standing by the open curtain, was Dorothy. She was delicately biting a cuticle and looking worriedly at us, a crowd of curious friends looking behind her. Cocking his head back, Red Hair walked toward her. He didn't say anything, but nodded and raised both his hands. First at me, then at her, as if to say, was this enough? That is the end of chapter 9.